Hello and welcome. It is October the 7th, 2024, which means it has been a year since Hamas's attack on Israel, and almost a year since death, devastation and destruction has gripped Gaza. It's been 365 days since the unprecedented Hamas attack on Israeli territory, which was followed by Israel's daily bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The war in Gaza is not just far from over. It has, in fact, snowballed into a larger conflict across West Asia. And nearly 1 year on, its impact has been echoing all across the world. Cities across the world have been witnessing protest rallies calling for an end to the Israel-Gaza war. These protests were also held in South Africa. Thousands hit the streets in major cities across the country, including Cape Town, Johannesburg and Durban, to mark support for Palestinians. People were seen waving Palestinian flags and chanting anti-Israel slogans. South African protesters accuse Israel of genocide and racism. In Cape Town, protesters walked to Parliament, where they handed over a memorandum calling for the government to isolate Israel through sanctions and boycotts.
Protesting the illegal occupation of the Palestinian land, and we are protesting what is happening in South Africa with our own people here as well. So there's the occupation in Palestine, there's the current bombing in Lebanon, there's the illegal occupation and siege in Syria, in Iran, in Yemen.
I stand with Palestine, and I feel like this march will maybe represent more of why everyone needs to stand with Palestine.
Elsewhere in Africa, pro-Palestinian rallies also took place in Morocco on the eve of the October 7th attack. Now, these protests in capital Rabat were among the largest demonstrations in months. Thousands of Moroccans from across the country gathered to march past the country's parliament. They called for justice for Palestinians and demanded the Moroccan government revoke its 2020 agreement formalizing its ties with Israel.
We are here in solidarity with the Palestinian and Lebanese people who are facing the arrogance of Israel that does not respect any principle or any international convention. Israel is not respecting any laws and is waging an aggressive war against these people.
Morocco was among the 4 Arab nations that signed the historic Abraham Accords that were brokered by then U.S. President Donald Trump. The UAE, Bahrain, Sudan and Morocco agreed to normalize ties with Israel under the deal. Though the Moroccan government has condemned the war in Gaza, it has retained its ties with Israel. Now, the ongoing war in Gaza has affected the stance of African countries toward Israel that had seen an improvement in recent years. Several African nations have voiced criticism against Israel as the Palestinian death toll has surpassed 41,000. Leading Africa's campaign against Israel is South Africa. In December last year, Pretoria took the world by surprise by launching a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ. It asked the World Court to rule on whether Israeli aggression in Gaza amounts to genocide. This case was brought by South Africa amid rallies against Israel in the country. Be it students, politicians or activists, South Africans demanded action from the government to protect Palestinians. Historically, South Africans have supported the Palestinian cause. From the days of Nelson Mandela, who led South Africa's fight against apartheid and founded the African National Congress. Many South Africans see the struggles of the Palestinians as similar to theirs against apartheid. Hence, Pretoria's stance against Israel has been unequivocal. Now, in July this year, in a landmark opinion, the ICJ asked Israel to end its illegal occupation in Gaza and said that it should stop settlement activity in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem as soon as possible. Though the ICJ rulings are not binding, it does carry political weight. It also marked the first time the World Court delivered a position on the legality of Israeli occupation. Over the past few months, South Africa's case at the ICJ has snowballed into a larger global affair. A growing list of nations have either formally applied to intervene in the case or declared their intent to do so. These include Egypt, Turkey, Libya, Nicaragua, Mexico, Colombia, and also European nations like Spain and Belgium. It has also faced strong opposition from Israel's partners, including its biggest ally, the United States. Washington has said that allegations of genocide against Israel are unfounded. Israel has also been reportedly lobbying the U.S. Congress to pressure South Africa to drop its case at the ICJ. But South Africa has refused to back down until the World Court makes a finding. Pretoria will be filing its memorial this month, 1 year on as the fighting escalates across West Asia and as the death toll continues to mount further with each passing day. Will South Africa receive more political support for its fight against Israel, or will it bow to the growing diplomatic pressure? And how will South Africa's campaign impact its foreign relations? Now, for more on this, we have with us Sayanda Sishiwigzil. She is a political commentator and journalist, joining us live from Johannesburg. Thanks for being with us, Sayanda.
Thank you for having me, Alison, and good afternoon to all of the Firstpost listeners and internationally overseas as well.
Now, a year since Hamas launched its attack on Israel. With the anniversary, South Africa has witnessed huge protests in support of Palestinians. What are the historical and political contexts that have led to South Africa filing their case against Israel at the ICJ?
South Africa suffered from a horrific history of the separation of races, which was a institution known as apartheid. And what apartheid basically did was that it separated people according to their race and their class. And so if, for example, what's happening in Palestine, there are certain places that Palestinians are not allowed to enter. Also here in South Africa, there are certain places where if you're a Black person, you are not allowed to enter. There was job reservation. So there are certain jobs that Black people are not allowed to enter into. Similar thing is happening in Israel. There are certain jobs that Palestinians are just not allowed to enter into. And there are certain jobs that are reserved only for Israeli people. There's also the issue of occupation. So here in South Africa, we had a system known as Bantustans, where basically it rendered Black people to be stateless. It meant that we did not belong to the state of South Africa, that we just here living on the permission of the white state. In Palestine, a similar thing is happening right now, where Palestinians are actually not seen as belonging to their own country. They don't have any semblance of self-determination. Their borders are controlled by Israel, and they cannot enter and move into certain spaces within their territory, such as in the West Bank, because they are occupied by Israel illegally. And so what we are seeing here historically is a lot of similarities to what we went through in apartheid. And if there's apartheid that is happening in one country, we as South Africans cannot and will not tolerate apartheid happening anywhere in the world. So it is our responsibility, and it is the responsibility of our government, also and the responsibility of DIRCO to lead our human rights effort in our foreign national agenda to make sure that apartheid everywhere the world over is destroyed. And so right now there's currently apartheid that is happening in Israel. There are Palestinian citizens who are being told that there's no way that they can go. They have no access to water and electricity. They're currently being bombarded. There are no schools or hospitals to speak of, and the horrors just continue to grow. Right. And so we need to make sure that us as South African citizens, we stand up for human rights of all Palestinians, including all people around the world, but including legal Palestinians arguments as well. The main legal arguments are basically the Geneva Convention.
What is the main?
Yes, right. Sorry, Alison. So the main legal arguments are the Geneva Convention. So the Geneva Convention of 1948 clearly states that you cannot target hospitals, you cannot target schools, you cannot target civilians either. And so this is the basis of the ICJ case that was brought that South Africa brought to the ICJ, which basically the ICJ ruled and said that yes, indeed, there are aspects of the Geneva Convention that are being contravened by Israel, and so Israel needs to stop occupying the illegal territories that they are occupying. And need to stop targeting hospitals, schools, and civilians in their bombardments in this war.
And how does the ICJ's jurisdiction apply to this case? And what are the potential outcomes of the court's ruling?
So how the ICJ's jurisdiction, how they are legally able to be arbiters in this case is because Israel is signatory to the Geneva Conventions of 1948. And so because they are a state, they are a recognized state by the UN, even though Palestine is currently not, because Israel is a recognized state, it means that they are signatory to the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention means that there are certain things that you're not supposed to do, such as bombing hospitals, right, bombing schools, targeting of civilians. These things are not allowed under international law when you're fighting another nation. And so it looks as allegedly that Israel is doing this, even though we can see the evidence that this is taking place. And so what South Africa is doing is saying that they need to make sure that they go to the international court in order to have these activities be declared as illegal. You rightfully pointed out in your introduction that the ICJ does not have any legal binding. They're not a legally binding institution. However, there are political ramifications to these kinds of rulings. And now we are seeing that the USA is actually now legally or illegally complicit in a genocide that is currently taking place.
And how might this case impact international relations and the broader geopolitical landscape, particularly in the Middle East and South Africa?
Well, right now we are currently seeing the actions and the things that have been going on, the activities that have been going on in Gaza start to spill out into the Middle East. We're seeing that Lebanon there's been bombings that have been happening in Lebanon. There has been action that has been taken from Iran. The Houthis rebels have been controlling the Red Sea. So there has been an outspill of conflict that has been going on in the Middle East as a result of what is happening in Gaza. But what we need to actually look at is what are the institutions from the Middle East and from Africa actually doing in order to protect their citizens and to make sure that they stand up for themselves. Because you now know that the UN is currently controlled and is captured by Western powers who are honestly on the side of Israel. And that is very, very clear to see in the veto rights that in the vetoing that is coming from the USA and the veto rights and using their veto against Palestine being adopted as and being recognized as a world state. And so what we need to do as an African continent in particular is make sure that we strengthen our position within the United Nations, push more for reform within the Security Council. Otherwise, there is nothing more that the United Nations can do. Just this week, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly voted 134 nations voted in majority of Israel ending its occupation, which means that if you go and take this to the Security Council and the USA picks up its hand and vetoes against this notion, it means that 100 and something countries will not see, their rights and their self-determination come to light in the United Nations, which is a democratic process because of these veto rights that these 5 nations have. And so it is incredibly important that the African continent, in particular the Middle East continent as well, really just consolidate their power and see where it is that they stand within the United Nations, because they definitely need to have some sort of reform that comes from the Security Council. Otherwise, there will be no kind of change that comes for the people of Palestine if this carries on the way that it is going within the United Nations.
Right. Ayanda, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa. As always, great to speak to you. Thank you for your analysis and explanations here.
Thank you.
Firstpost decodes the U.S. election, explains how America chooses its president. Your primer on the race to the White House. Everything you need to know about how America votes and its global implications. U.S. Election Explained, every Monday and Thursday only on Firstpost.